Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lana Wilson, and I am the acting director curator of the Mann Art Gallery here in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. We are on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation here in Prince Albert, and we're inside the beautiful E.A. Rawlinson Centre for the Arts. Thank you for joining us. This is part of our virtual programming series during the COVID-19 pandemic while the Mann Art Gallery is closed to the public. Our staff are working a combination of at the office and from home, and we wanted to find ways to keep our audience engaged. We do still have the Winter Festival Art Show and Sale, the 44th annual Winter Festival, on the walls because people have not been able to pick up their artwork yet. And so it's really wonderful for me and Tia, our registrar, to get out of the house and come to work and be still surrounded by all this beautiful art. The Winter Festival is providing the inspiration for these current series of art appreciation talks live on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. And today our topic is landscape painting. Because I'm an art historian, one of the things that I'm always passionate about learning is not just what artists are painting or how they're painting it, or how they're creating their art, but why they're doing it and how they think about why they're doing it and how they feel while they're doing it. It's really that why and how that why can change throughout history, what we're making art about, why, what we're trying to communicate. That's really interesting to me as an art historian. And so we'll start out just with a really brief discussion of landscape painting itself. And so thinking about how so many Canadian artists really are passionate about painting the landscape today, there was a time when landscape painting was pretty uncool, and especially in the Western European artistic tradition, which is where the majority of my training is. Now, Asia and China have a very different understanding of landscape painting. Think back to beautiful ink and scroll paintings and engravings by Japanese and Chinese artists, and you'll see landscape painting emerge as its own genre in China in the 4th or 5th century CE, whereas you don't see landscape painting really come into its own or be considered as a legitimate genre of painting until the 16th century, until the beginning of the Renaissance in Western Europe, in France and Italy. Of course, at that time, prior to that, the Academy tradition of painting was really valuing the human figure, historical scenes, epic battles, images of the gods and goddesses, of historical figures, allegorical, metaphorical scenes. These were really seen as the valuable types of paintings. Still life, was certainly a genre to itself, but you weren't seeing landscape painting really come being given the attention that it came to have or be considered as a genre until Flemish painters really started focusing on the landscape as a beautiful setting for their images of religious art, right? They would set a crucifixion scene with Jesus Christ on the cross within an incredible Netherlands landscape. And you see this happening with Peter Bruegel the Elder. In the 1500s and 1600s, you'll see other people creating these incredible landscapes with wonderful atmospheric perspective. You see that being picked up in France and Italy afterwards, and you see people moving into appreciating what we would call the classical landscape, where everything is perfectly manicured lawns and trees don't have a leaf out of place. And you see this happening in the 17 and 1800s. And in the 1800s and 1900s, you start to see an interest in Romanticism, where the idea is we're painting epic nature and we're celebrating nature's grandeur and the powerful emotions that provokes in us, right? We're seeing dramatic skies, we're seeing lonely ruins, we're seeing lone figures walking out on these moors. We're seeing thunderstorms, right? We're seeing watercolors that Turner is painting. And we're seeing more and more artists being able to paint on plein air, right? Outside. Because now in the late 17 and the early 1800s, they have access to paint in tubes or watercolor paint that they're putting in pans, and so they can actually bring out their painting equipment into the landscape, and they're more interested in capturing the feeling, the mood of the place, right? The Impressionists were really interested in capturing that mood. We see different interest in the human's mark on the landscape at different periods of time. And landscape painting can be quite political in terms of what we're showing, how we're showing it, who we're leaving out, and where we're directing our gaze. And so are we celebrating the paintings of humankind's impact on the landscape, or are we showing a vacant landscape? Are we showing like a virgin forest, or a landscape that is not showing any signs of human habitation? And how does that change how we think about the natural world and our place in it? So I just wanted to show you a few images in this year's Winter Festival that can help us think about landscape painting and our place in it, and maybe what the artist was perhaps trying to capture or communicate, and how it communicates to us. So we're looking at some fantastic landscapes on the front wall of the gallery here. This is a fantastic piece that did receive many votes for People's Choice Award, although it was not the winner. This is Nikki Ault from Saskatoon, Lakeland Radiance. And this is wonderful, seeing these beautiful painterly effects. And right, we're not seeing any signs of human habitation here, but we get that wonderful sense of being peaceful and alone with nature and appreciating the beauty of our wonderful Saskatchewan skies. And so we're capturing that peaceful sense, especially in Canada, and especially with the movements of celebrating national identity through landscape painting that the Group of Seven was creating. We really do see Canadian identity being tied to our landscapes, and certainly in Prince Albert, being here in the Lakeland country, we can kind of celebrate the beauty of our geography, but also our sense of identity as folks living in north central Saskatchewan with landscape works. I love this one here. This is by Crystal Frenette, and this is called Love to the Boreal Forest. And so look at how carefully stitched these animals are, really celebrating all of the flora and fauna here of the forest, and showing the inhabitants. So I love this, right? We're putting some life into the landscape. Over here, this is a wonderful piece. Sorry, I'm having trouble with the reflections on it. This is the winner of the Art Placement Award for accomplishments in watercolor. So thank you to Art Placement for generously sponsoring 4 awards. And this is Jerome Mrazek here in Prince Albert, and it's called Cars on 11th Street in watercolor and gouache. And you can see that, of course, he's choosing to depict the built environment. He's choosing to give us a sense of where we live, the cars that we drive, right, our street lamps, and of course the really recognizable building here of Town Hall, right, of the Prince Albert City Hall. And so the different buildings that make up our landscape and how the shadows are changing, and giving us a sense of that mood and places where we walk and see every day, right? That sense of home in the landscape and the buildings that surround us. And then just below it, from Joanne Bolen, we see a piece called Geometric Present. And this is very small, actually. It's 8 by 10, and you can see it's not very big. But in this piece, she's managed to capture some wonderful sense of space and shadow, as she's managed to get foreground, midground, and background. And our eye is really drawn through the painting into the back of that highlight area. And again, right, we don't see any sign of human habitation here. We're celebrating being able to get out and be alone in nature. And that kind of romantic concept of being able to escape our busy, hectic lives and return to nature is something that we see modernist painters. The Impressionists were talking about how hectic daily life was becoming in industrialized society, and we definitely see this idea of returning to nature and the peace and calm that nature brings us really starts to become an important element in writers who are talking about daily life and the ways that humans are living their lives, as well as in other art forms like painting. This is a beautiful glass piece depicting a winter landscape by Valinda Lawson. Here's George Glenn using natural elements like tent, caterpillar, cocoons. This piece is called Waiting for Spring. We're almost there, George, despite that snow blizzard yesterday. And over here we see some more prairie icons, right? Talk about a sense of identity through landscape and the man-made built environment. This is Paige Mortensen. Paige is represented in our collection, and this is called Gone Again, right? Talking about nostalgia, talking about how these iconic buildings, the prairie elevators, and to some degree even railroad tracks are disappearing from our landscape, and talking about how, you know, the landscape does change, right? We put those buildings here and now we're tearing them down as the ways that humans live on the land is changing over time. Paige is using a watercolor batik technique, and so she's painting with watercolor on top of jinwashi paper. That's a type of Japanese fiber paper. And then she's sealing the lighter areas off with wax and then applying darker sections successively. And then at the end, she is melting all of the wax off the piece. And so you get this wonderful buildup and layers of color. But definitely a familiar scene, and a scene that's going to provoke a sense of nostalgia as we think about, you know, maybe not seeing scenes like this anymore. Another image that I wanted to point out, because we did just lose this artist, Bob Pitzel, passed away last week, and we did share his obituary on the Man Art Gallery Facebook page. And so this Bob won the John and Marjorie Hicks Memorial Award, and this is called Bullier Number 1. And it is, of course, the very first elevator, number 1, of the Saskatchewan wheat pool that he's depicted here. And Bob has won numerous awards for watercolor over the years at the Winter Festival show. And you can see just how precise his paintbrush strokes are, right? The joke is that he's using a 2-hair brush, and just how precise his lettering is. Look at those tiny reflections on the glass windows. And so really, I guess it would maybe even be debatable, is this a landscape painting, or is this a type of portrait of this particular grain elevator building? I mean, we do see that element of the landscape, but maybe he is painting a portrait of this building, and what that means for him, and what it means and meant for Saskatchewan. So definitely something that, a subject that's very dear to his heart. And then over here, this is Naomi McNiece, and this is called Fields and Flowers, and it's an acrylic work. And here we see Naomi is really punching up the colors to convey her sense of the Saskatchewan landscape. And she is painting a familiar scene, driving by right on these flat roads. But we do see that human presence, right? We do see those endless rows of telephone poles stretching off into the distance. So really highly saturated colors. And she's got these great colors for wildflowers down on the surface. So, right, Saskatchewan, especially in the central and southern part of the province, we think of those wide open prairies and those very flat horizons. So wonderful, interesting depiction here of that iconic scene. And then we're moving into the education studio. is a highly symbolic image there, using natural imagery. I would hesitate to call this a landscape, of course, because definitely the tree is the central theme here, and the imagery of the tree. This is Burrell Fournier, and it's called Domains. And see, she's got the roots of the tree there covering the whole earth, and perhaps these lines of power and energy are suffusing the area around the tree. Here we see a similar scene. We have that prairie landscape, but really subtle color gradations in the sky, and some wonderful texture, and a very soft treatment of elements in the foreground and the midground here. Really subtle and toned down colors. This is a real contrast to the high saturation of Naomi's. This is Karen McGuire, the Quiet Land acrylic and pastel on canvas. And I'll show you just how impressionistically she is treating the area at the bottom of the canvas here, and just how subtle she's creating some blending. Do you see the pastel is just lying on the surface, and you get a hint of the acrylic behind it? It's creating this kind of broken effect that gives a great sense of layers, and our brain fills in the rest. I'll show you a close-up of her skies here. Great sense of unity of color by bringing these rust areas from the grasses here into the sky. So there we're celebrating the flatness of our horizon, right? The orientation of the piece is really quite long in the horizontal. And then we will contrast that with a very dramatic sky. I love this piece. This is by Rehang Kim. This is Summer Sunset. And I'm not familiar with this artist. This is the first time that I've seen their work, but I was just blown away by the very dramatic interpretation of the skies here, right? If we're talking about identity and landscape in Saskatchewan, we're certainly talking about the skies, right? It's on our license plates, Land of the Living Skies. And we see how we have those incredible dancing colors. Is this a storm? Is this a sunset? Is this Northern Lights? We just see these wonderful passages of layered color here. And then the emphasis on the waving grass, right? We see these great movement shapes. The grass isn't straight up and down, right? It's flowing and swaying in a rhythm that mimics the horizontal lines in the sky. So again, right, we see that emphasis on the horizontal, the straight horizon, but then we're seeing a contrast in the line work between the diagonals in the sky and then those upright vertical and slight diagonal elements of the grasses. And then finally, I will show you, I was looking for something that perhaps could be called a sense of the romantic landscape, something really dramatic, showing the beauty and grandeur of nature. And I was immediately drawn to this piece here. This is Jacqueline Guido, and she's very talented at sewing and costume design in addition to painting. And this is Opiska Highlands Sunrise, acrylic on canvas. And talk about those complementary colors there, those yellows and those violets, and really again pumping up those colors to create that sense of drama. And the details in the sky, those horizontal lines. And then we see the blue in these mountains, and we see all of these specks of orange sitting on the surface. And these lines that are, again, drawing our eye through the foreground into the midground, a bit of a pause for the mountains in the midground, and then in the background we see this high horizon line leading us into the sky. And then of course, no discussion about dramatic, romantic sense of nature would be complete without some northern lights. And so we'll finish with Jody Miller. Jody recently was showing a series similar to this at the John M. Culinary Library. This is Jody Miller, Is Anyone Listening? Acrylic on cradleboard. And she's really showing those dancing lights. She has been experimenting with pixelating the landscape. And so we see these Mondrian-esque geometric shapes at the bottom of her landscape. And then those are contrasted with the more flowing organic lines towards the top of the painting in the sky. So a really unique contrast there. And especially with those firm, hard geometric lines, an emphasis again on the straightness of the horizontal line. So really, really interesting, not surprising. Last year, we were speaking to Kim Ennis when he had his exhibition of geometric abstract paintings at the Mann Art Gallery. And he made the joke that you cannot show a straight horizontal line in Saskatchewan or anywhere on the prairies without people automatically interpreting it as a horizon. And so anytime I see a straight line, that's what I'm going to think of. But we'll finish off with a close-up as we look at those swirling lines. So again, really strong diagonals and this wonderful layering and a vibrancy of color, right? We've seen really vibrant colors in Nikki Ault's lake, here in Jody Miller's skies, and in the sunsets that we love to photograph and paint here in Saskatchewan. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Here we have two more images of human impact on the landscape here, right? The agricultural elements of the landscape. Leslie Blacklock, the old red barn, and Kim Laprairie, pink clouds, right? We've got how closely tied, especially in the southern part of the province, we see, right, that impact. And of course, Saskatchewan has not always been filled with agricultural industry, right? Of course, thousands of years before that, right, we didn't see this kind of intensive agriculture, but we see certainly how much that has become part of how we represent the prairies since colonization and settling, and how we do see these buildings and the bales as really part and parcel now of the Saskatchewan landscape, but not always. And we have these wonderful natural elements to appreciate as well. So thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed our brief discussion of landscapes here in the Winter Festival Juried Art Show and Sale. And if you want to learn more, definitely just Google history of landscape painting. Have a look at how Asian and Japanese artists have been representing landscapes for thousands of years. Have a look at how Western Europeans have been representing landscapes for hundreds of years. And think about whether you're looking at a landscape that's meant to only show natural elements, or how we might see signs of human habitation in the landscape. And then maybe think about how that makes you feel, or what sense of emotions or moods that provokes and brings up in you. So I will take some questions if anyone has any questions or wants to comment about some of the works that we saw. So I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. Kim Ornick, thank you, says that she really loves Paige's artwork. Yes, I agree. I definitely love Paige's work and how she's using that watercolor batik technique. Well, certainly let us know if you enjoy this series and if you'd like to see more. And thank you very much for joining us for Art Appreciation Considerations on Landscape Painting today. Everyone stay safe, stay at home, wash your hands, and I hope to see you back next Tuesday when we talk about another theme of art appreciation at the Mann Art Gallery. Thank you.